working?
I'm talking with Marty, the tour guide, and Marty, you really raised some eyebrows with some misconceptions about William Wallace and Braveheart.
Well, Braveheart did wonders for my country's tourism, so I am loath to say anything bad about the film. But it is very important to point out the inaccuracies. Firstly, and most importantly, Braveheart. Braveheart is another person in Scottish history. Nothing to do with William Wallace. Secondly, Wallace was a lowland Scot, born in the lowlands, so he did not wear a kilt. Only Highlanders from the north wear kilts. Wallace wore a green tunic and green trousers. Wallace did not wear makeup going into battle. The people who wore the makeup were the indigenous people of the country, the Picts, and they mysteriously vanished from history at the end of the 9th century. The first battle in the film they called the Battle of Stirling, and it was portrayed to be fought on a pitched field. This was one of the most important battles in Scottish history. It was the Battle of Stirling Bridge, fought over the River Forth on a narrow wooden bridge. It was implied that Wallace had an affair with a Princess of Wales. Twice it was heavily insinuated that she was carrying Wallace's child. Well, I hope not, for she was 4 years old at that particular time. And Wallace and Edward I did not die simultaneously. Edward I lived for another 2 years after the execution of Wallace. That is just some of the inaccuracies.
And what about the Robin Hood mention that you had?
Well, I'll give you a brief overview of Wallace. As I said, Wallace was a lowland Scot. He wore a green tunic and green trousers. 6'7" William Wallace. We know how tall he was. We have his sword. Swords were made to measure. 6'7" William Wallace had a little brother. His little brother was John. Wallace's girlfriend was a milkmaid. Her name was Marion. Wallace travelled nowhere without his own private chaplain right at his side for luck, commonly known as a friar. Although Wallace did use a two-handed broadsword in battle, it was his hunting skill with the bow and arrow he was famous for. Wallace and his army lived in Ettrick Forest, and during the Wars of Independence they would rob from the rich and give to the poor. A very familiar story, word for word the story of Robin Hood. Robin Hood is nothing more than the legend of Wallace that was corrupted over time and distance travelling throughout the British Isles. The name Robin Hood came from an expression, the robbing hood, R-O-B-I-N-G. During his thieving escapades, Wallace wore a large green hood over his head, the robbing hood.